Hey, and thanks for turning in to another episode of the Black Millennial Wife. Please like, share, join in the conversation in the comments. We would love to hear from you guys. I'm Jet.
And I'm Avis. So for this episode, we want to start off by highlighting a Black-owned business. So the one that I would like to speak about is called MoistUR Beauty. So they do a lot of like natural oils and stuff like that. What I have is the Get Up and Glow oil. You can see that. So it's got little sparkles in it. It's not too much though. And it smells really good. It's a body oil. I have been looking for a body oil and wanted something with like a light fragrance, but not too heavy. You know, I want to smell good around the house, but I'm not going nowhere. So I'm not putting on heavy like perfumes and stuff. But affordable price. The girl that owns it is so good at customer service. She replied real quick to a question that I had. She shipped it out really fast too. So her website is www.moisturbeauty, and it's MoistUR beauty.com.
Awesome. So the Black business that I would like to highlight is a event coordinating business. It is called Everyday Occasion. I have worked with this event planning business, and the owner, Adrienne, is absolutely amazing. She has a great attention to detail. Her pricing is very reasonable. And her goal is to be able to help people plan the best events, parties, birthdays, whatever it is, and she does an awesome job. She can be found on Instagram at Everyday Occasion LLC. She can also be reached on her website, which is 365occasion.com.
Oh,
Awesome. So let's get started with our conversation today, sis. Okay, so we're talking about sex. So, obviously, sex is a big part of marriage. It's one thing that you do with your spouse that is not intended for anybody else. And so that makes it a big part. The Bible speaks about sex. So it's a serious conversation to be had. I want to start off by posing the question, do you think that sex before marriage with your spouse or with anybody else affects your marriage?
oh yeah. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. Like, transparency. We talk about that a lot on this. Um, I feel like I've had challenges, especially early in my marriage, when it came to sex because it wasn't new to me. Like, I remember how losing my virginity was and like how exciting like sex had been because I had did it like early, right? And I didn't have that same excitement of it being fresh and new with my husband. Like, we tried to stay on the right path, but we definitely had sex before we were married. And I just think about what it would have been us discovering like our bodies sexually and each other sexually if it had been for the first time with each other in our marriage. So yeah, I think it definitely lessens maybe like the beauty of what marriage is when it comes to sex if you have it before you get married. But I think, most people do.
Yeah. Do you believe in soul ties?
Oh my God. Do we want to talk about soul ties
I
today?
mean, let's just dabble in some soul ties. Let's do it. Let's bring it all to the people.
I'm gonna have to talk to my husband, make sure he okay with me doing this part. But yeah, I believe in soul ties. And it's unfortunate that I did not realize that I had a soul tie with someone until I was married. And I was not in the right headspace to give myself to my husband sexually, freely, and wholly because I was still struggling with this soul tie from somebody that I had ended the relationship with him years prior to, and it was done, and it wasn't a matter of, oh, I want to be with him or nothing like that, but it just definitely affected what we could have had in our marriage early on.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I believe in soul ties as well. I think that's one of the reasons God tells us to wait until marriage, because he obviously sees and knows things that we don't know, and we don't realize when we're in it, in the moment, that us having sex with somebody else can tie us to that person in a way that is completely unhealthy for what is to come in our future. So I definitely agree with it for sure. For me, I would say I believe that sex before marriage is definitely something that can affect your marriage for sure. It can affect it in a way to where, without the intent of even wanting to hurt your spouse, um, your mind is a powerful thing, and it remembers things even if you have no intent on remembering them or recalling things. And I think you struggle with that, I think, subconsciously, just knowing that you've already had sex before. I obviously had sex before I was married. And like you said, it takes away from this huge moment that you're supposed to embark upon with your spouse. And it's still beautiful and it's still wonderful, but it's still, I mean, you already know what this is. It's like going to a new store. Like, okay, it's more clothes. The clothes are nice. I love the clothes. Hey, they bomb. But it's still different. I mean, it's not like I've never been shopping before. Once you buy a designer purse, it's still just another purse. There's nothing special about it. But I think that we have to remember, as women of God, as if there's single women watching this who have not had sex before marriage, that is the way that a person who did have sex before marriage would advise you to keep that, because that's something special, and you don't want to take something that is meant for the person that you spend the rest of your life with and give it away without cause and without, yeah, I mean, that's really what it was, because we were young. So I'm just whatever, and not thinking twice about it, about how this may affect me later. And you live and you learn. But that would be my advice to any woman who is still a virgin, is to stay that way until you're married. And I think that that will allow your marriage to be in a different place when it comes to that. You know what I mean? So I think that's definitely important and something to hold on to if you still have it, for sure. Next question. How often, once you're married, do you feel is a healthy amount of times to have sex, let's say, per week?
Whatever makes sense for you and your spouse. Like, if y'all are good with 1 time a week, okay. If y'all are good with 5 times a week, okay. I think what is difficult is if one person is on one side of the spectrum and another person is on the opposite side of the spectrum. So that can be a challenge in a relationship. And it's been a challenge in our relationship, because we had to really take our pride out of it, maybe is the right way. Like, we had to take some selfishness out of it. We had to take some training, out of it. And when I say training, it's like, we are taught, especially as women, like, you keep yours. My mom always used to say, you keep your cookie until you're married, right? And so I did not keep my cookie until I was married, but I hid the fact that I did not keep my cookie until I was married. So it was like this level of shame that went along with not being a virgin anymore. And it felt like it was something that was dirty, like something I could not talk to my mother about, could not have open conversations with. So you have all that training and all that, mind work of, this is something I should keep secret. This, my sexuality is not something that, is open and can be discussed, to being with somebody who it's safe to have those discussions with, to be open with, and to be free with. And I'm just supposed to do it overnight. It was so hard for me. It was just kind of like, no, this is still supposed to be a secret. This is still supposed to be something that we can't talk about. Like, I don't want to talk about sex. I don't want to try and figure out what works for you and what works for me and how we can make it work together. And so we struggle with finding the right balance between me trying to reprogram myself and him understanding that the talks that little boys get around sex is different from the talks that little girls get around sex. So he had to understand, like, my wife has been trained to not want this thing, to not acknowledge her want or need for this thing. And so it's taking time for us to get to a place, and we're definitely still working on it, but whatever works for you and your spouse, but you got to make sure that it works for you and your spouse. Um, the Bible talks about not denying each other unless you are going on a fast for the sole purpose of getting closer to the Lord. So, like, you know, being available is important, and having those conversations and being open to the fact that that may change for one of, you know what I mean? Like, my husband and I just had our first child. Like, our sex life looks a little different from what it did before. Like, we got to time it right, because our child needs our attention and needs us. So, you just have to be open to having the conversation and finding out what works for your spouse and what works for you. So,
So since you touched on it, I'm going to go ahead and just ask this question as a follow-up.
okay,
If I'm mad, I still got to give it up to my husband?
man, yeah, you do. Yeah, you got to give it up. And it's not giving it up. Like, that's not what it is. It's being sexually available for your husband to meet his need. And that's important. You don't want to deprive your husband of that, because that can open the door for other things. And not to say that those other things are the woman's fault, but it's it can be a snowball effect. So, I'm not saying you have to be happy about it every time. I've definitely just said, all right, man, come on. Like, let's do it then. If that's what you want to do right now. I'm really not trying to talk to you. I'm really not interested in yeah, I'm not interested in all of that, but we go ahead and get it in. So
Yeah, I agree with you, because we have to remember, as Christian wives, our goal is not pleasing ourselves or our husbands. It's pleasing God. And he commands us and tells us in the Bible that our body is no longer our own once we are married. And sex, I was always taught that by older couples, that sex should never be used as a manipulation tool. Oh, well, you did this, I'm not having sex with you tonight. Whether it's sex or cooking or whatever, those things should not be used as a manipulation tool as a Christian wife. And that's what we're here talking as, is Christian wives. And that's something that, if you struggle with that type of mentality, to say that I want to use something as leverage against my spouse, like, that's a habit that you got to break right away, because that's not the way that God would have us to do it. And it's not fair to your spouse to do that. So I definitely agree with you. You have to, you got to be there for your husband in the way that you're supposed to. And you already touched on it when you talked about not holding out on your spouse unless it's for the purpose of getting closer to God. And then the key part is that you come back together,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what gets left out, is the come back together piece,
Mm-hmm.
and say, oh, well, yeah, I'm using this to pray or get closer to God. And then boom, you just, that, not doing what you're supposed to be doing as a Christian wife. That's exactly what we're talking about. For me, I would also say that your healthiness of your sex life with your spouse is between you and your spouse. We've talked already before about us not being experts. So we have no like specific number as to, oh, this is a healthy sex life, and no doctor should, no relationship expert should, or anything, because it's really what happens between you and your spouse, and what, like you said, you determine as a couple is healthy for y'all. I think that for us, especially early in our marriage, Trey was working evenings. And so when I got off work, he was going to work and wouldn't get home until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And that put a strain on our sex life for sure. And so you have to take into different accounts children. I mean, anything. You have an elderly parent living with you, or anything. You have to make sure that you take into account the things that are happening in your life. And I would say my biggest piece of advice is have that conversation with your spouse. If you feel like you're not getting enough, if he feels like he's not getting enough, if it's too often, you feel like you be tired, and you be hurt, you be a little sore, you back a little thrown out, whatever it may be, you got to tell your spouse. You got to talk to that person and let them know, this is what I need, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I'm struggling with. So I think that's the biggest piece, is having that conversation with your spouse, and you guys coming together to decide what your sex life should look like.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And be open to changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we Jet and I are over 30 now. And, you know, it's just different from being 19, 20. Like, it's different. Our interests are different. The things that, put us in the mood are different. The things that take us out of the mood are different. So, you have to be open to those changes and growing together sexually, and not just trying to stay stagnant in your sex life, in your marriage.
So, in that same vein,
Mm-hmm.
how do you go about suggesting new things to your spouse? Like, say you want to be whipped and tied and chained up, but your spouse, he just don't seem like the type of guy that's into that. How do you go about suggesting things like that to your spouse?
I think you have to know your spouse. So, I think for my marriage in particular, I couldn't just whip out a chain in the middle of having sex. Like, Philip ain't. That's going to cut the mood short real fast. But a conversation like, hey, babe, I've been feeling this way. I like to give it a shot. What do you think about it? It's healthy. And, I think if you can't have the conversation with your spouse, who are you supposed to have that conversation with? So it really is a matter of getting comfortable with that material in your life, like with your desires in your life. I think something that's interesting when it comes to men and women is like, women know what works when we feel what works. So I think, you have to your spouse should be willing to try things to see if it works. And if it's not working, then how I have suggested things is to send an article. Send an article and text message, while he's at work. So we ain't got to talk about it right now. But, just know it'll be a topic when you get home. And so that gives him time to like read the article, see what's going on, maybe develop how he feels about it initially. And then we have a conversation later about how that's going to play out, if it's going to play out. So that's been beneficial for me. And he does the same thing now. So when it's something that he would like to do, he just shoots me an article, a text message. It's been a couple times I look at it and roll my eyes and put my phone down. But after some time, I come back to it. I really give it some thought. And then we, have the conversation and proceed accordingly. So that's been something that's worked for us. If you're struggling with that, then I would maybe suggest it.
Absolutely. I think that's a genius idea. We've done that with each other as well. And I think that for me, the way I suggest things is just like at a super random time. Like we could be having dinner, everything is perfect, and maybe something has run across my head, and I just bring it up in a super casual way. Like it's not in the midst of anything or whatever. It's just a casual conversation. And I think that allows my husband to be able to talk through it and stuff like that with me. But we've done the article thing as well. And I think you have to know your spouse. You like you said, you have to know your spouse to know how to be able to approach your spouse. Because maybe your spouse is the one that can just take it like boom, give it to him. And hey, that's fine. If he can just tell him what it is right then and there, and he down for the cause, then go with it. But if you feel like you gotta just, approach him slowly, text message before you have to see each other for a couple hours, give him time to think about it. I know my husband likes to process things. So, you got to do what works best for you and your spouse. And then I think a big part of it is if you got to get to the point where you feel safe enough to have that conversation. You talked about sex being kind of taboo when you were growing up. That's the same way it wasn't necessarily taboo in my house. It was more so just not discussed. And then for my husband, it was more so taboo. So we both came into our marriage with this preconceived notion in our mind of what sex is, and not even knowing that this is your spouse and you feel safe with them and you love them, but that subconscious kicks in. The mind is so powerful, and that plays a part. And so you've got to get to the point where you're like, okay, this is the man I'm doing life with. I should be able to talk to him about anything, however crazy you trying to get. You should be able to talk to your spouse about it.
Another thing that I think is important to touch on this topic in relation to marriage is it's not uncommon for in marriages partners to not be on the same page when it comes to sex. Like that's not uncommon. Like if that is something that you're experiencing, you're not by yourself. Like we've definitely been there. Like, but I think it's worth the effort to get to a place where you are on the same page. It's super uncomfortable. It's weird. Like, it's kind of like, are we even on the same wavelengths? Like you question things, but it's worth the work, because what God wants for you sexually in your marriage is for it to be spectacular. He wants it to be so enjoyable and so great for you, and to not take the time to really invest to get on the same page if you're not on the same page is doing your marriage a disservice, for real. And it takes time. It takes sometimes years, like to really be that for each other, but it's so worth it when you get to that point. And I would, say if you need to go to counseling about it, if you need to talk to somebody else about it, to work through it, because really and truly it comes down to the blind leading the blind. Like we don't know how to navigate this. Like we are two people coming from two different backgrounds, two different ideas about what sex is supposed to look like. And here we are. And to not put in the work is detrimental to your marriage. It causes resentment. It causes anger. It causes the devil to get a foothold and infidelity to happen, whether it's physical or emotional infidelity. So if you're there, like, just know that we are praying for you. We hope that you are praying for us, that we have the sex life in our marriage that the Lord wants us to have. And for us to know that that is fulfilling, and that's the thing that we deserve in our marriages. So it can be a sticky topic when it comes to Christianity and all that. I don't think I've ever heard a sermon at my church or any church that I've gone to about how sex is supposed to go in a marriage, which is really unfortunate, because I think if we had that early on and not just don't do it until you get married, that may have changed it for us.
Because if we're not getting it from the church, where are we getting it from?
Our little friends that don't know what they're talking about neither.
Exactly. And that's the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed the conversation, sis. It's always a pleasure. So we would like to wrap up our episode by sharing how we won at adulting this week. Everybody wants to grow up. Everybody wants to be an adult until it happens and you realize it don't ever stop. So we would like to celebrate ourselves, and I hope that you celebrate yourself whenever you do something that is allowing you to be the absolute best adult that you can be. So I won at adulting this week by taking the next steps to start my online consignment business. I have purchased my mannequin to take pictures of the clothes on. I have purchased my scale because I'm going to be doing my own shipping and packing and all of that. So my next step is putting everything together, getting the pictures taken and all of that. So I'm super excited about that. I'm super proud of myself because it's something I've been wanting to do. And so I want to celebrate myself for winning at adulting by making those next steps to start my business.
Wow,
what about you?
That's good. So for me, we have a room in our house that has turned into the catch-all room, like boxes from Amazon shipments and just stuff. And I went in there and I looked and I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, this shouldn't be the case. So I went in and I threw away everything that we did not need, did not want. I cleaned, I organized, I set up, and it just looks so much better. It's the space that my husband is like, it's like our at-home office too. So like he's working from home for, a few days out of the week. So he's in there with all this clutter. I don't really think it bothered him, but it bothered me. And so I won at adulting by getting rid of stuff that we did not need and organizing our space, like a clear space, and enables a clear mind. So that's how I won at adulting this week. Now, is it gonna look like that a week from now, a month from now, clean? Probably not. But I'll loop this back and say it again when I clean it again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for joining our conversation. I hope you got something from it. I would say a little takeaway for myself would be that you have to be comfortable to have conversations with your spouse, regardless of what it may be. We spoke about sex today. It could be anything: finances, your children, families, whatever it is. Even if it feels uncomfortable, if you feel like you're stepping on some toes, you've got to get to the place where you know that you can have conversations, tough and easy, with the person that you're doing life with. So that would be my takeaway. What about you?
My takeaway would be open and be willing. Just be open and be willing. When you don't want to, when you're not interested, be open and be willing to the person that you want that same thing from. So, you guys, thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening to our 2 cents. We would love for you to tell us, some suggestions maybe, right? We're building this community of support for each other. Give us some suggestions on how you have maintained, established a good, healthy sex life with your partner, right? So hopefully if somebody's struggling, they can go through those comments and get an idea from the Lord that helps them. So we look forward to reading those comments and seeing what you guys have to say. So thanks again for sticking with us. Tune in for our next episode coming out shortly. Thanks.
Bye.